What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
We return for another new episode of AmericaTrendsPodcast.com, and they never grow old, John. They never do.
No, we have some very interesting guests.
Well, you know, the truth of the matter is that because we're doing trends, we're looking out a bit. That makes us more than something that you just hear one day and it really has been swept away by the next day's headlines. So our stuff really does hold up pretty
really
well.
Does,
it
yeah.
really does.
And the people are just wonderful that we have on.
Absolutely. And I've got to tell you that as I get older, and by the way, I'm Larry Rifkin, John Krofsik with me, of course, it's fair to say that a dream that many of us as we get older have is to shed all of our responsibilities, John.
That's right, to retire.
Well, the things we did, you know, where you were at a job and you were punching a clock and you had to be there from 9 until 5, and you had a man to serve,
Yep.
and you had a child you had to raise, or a parent perhaps who was more elderly that you took care of, and a place that you had to be at all times. You were always tethered to the clock, right?
That's true, yeah. Yep.
And I mean, that lasts for a long time.
That does a lot of your life.
And I got to tell you that as you get older, and even if you're in some stage of retirement, it's almost difficult to get that rhythm out of your system.
It is. Well, not only that, because in this society, we're kind of identified by the job we do too. So that adds to that whole.
Well, that's a great point, that when you lose that identity, do you lose yourself in that process? And you've got to reinvent yourself. But, you know, I was just thinking as to what I just said about every day and a clock to punch and a man to serve. I started sounding like a Bruce Springsteen monologue. I really did there.
You ready to write a song?
Yeah. Well, I've got to tell you, Bruce Springsteen means a lot to me because my second date with my wife of now 40 years was at the New Haven Coliseum. And I've outlived that Coliseum. That was raised many years ago, so that no longer exists. But my marriage persists, thank goodness. And I remember he did a monologue to the song "It's My Life."
Okay, yeah.
Remember the Animal song?
Yep.
It's my life, and I'll do what I want. And if any young people are listening, I mean, we had our own protests back in the 60s and the 70s. We were angry, too. And we didn't like authority any better than you do, but we had better music to go with our anger, I think.
I think so, too.
And It's My Life was a remarkable song. But Bruce Springsteen was talking about his parents and talking about, I come home and my dad's smoking a cigarette on the porch. And he said, "Where you been, son?" And, he's rebellious and they're building up to a crescendo of music. And he said, I said, "Dad, I was out playing my guitar." And he never called it a guitar. He always called it that goddamn guitar. And it was just great. And then he built it up. And I said, "Daddy, I don't want to be a doctor. Mommy, I don't want to be a lawyer. I just want to play rock and roll." And then he goes into it. I mean, it was incredible. The power. I mean, he could have had us doing anything he asked at that moment, had us in the palm of his hands. Well, at any rate, that was a long time ago. And now I have arrived at a time when retirement is really possible. And that's good.
That is
and
good.
A lot of people have the dream, John, having shed all those responsibilities and that time clock of just getting on the road in a van and saying, "I want to see America."
Yeah, I can see that.
So that means that you don't have place, you don't have time, and it's all on your schedule, your creativity. What do I want to see? What have I missed out on all of these years? And breaking free of that should be liberating at this stage, correct?
You would think, yeah. I mean, you're seeing America, seeing all the great parks and everything. I mean, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, is that what you dream of a little bit?
I'd like to see the West and see the parks and stuff around. So yes.
Yeah, I could see you with a campfire under the big sky. I
There
can.
you go.
No map, no GPS, no time to be there, no time to leave. Except
the GPS saves a lot of arguing.
It's kept marriages together, including mine. But, you have your own measure. When you're bored, you leave or you complete your
That's
wanderings.
true.
And, that's the beautiful part of a retirement in terms of possibility. However, John, and there's always a catch here on
For a lot of people,
America
that's
Trends.
not possible.
Well, you may have had that dream of the RV, the wind at your back, where to go, camping in Alaska or whatever. But there are people today who are making the decision to get on the road, and they're not doing it for the same reasons that we're describing.
No, you're right. They're really in need. They were hit by the recession, and now they're looking for work.
Well, on today's podcast, folks, we are going to introduce you to what is becoming, John, a new subculture here in America. And they, too, are on the road, but in a very different way. It may be on four wheels, but they are simply trying to survive America in this curious century where the temperatures are getting hotter, but the social winds are blowing a lot colder. And, John, we've focused a good bit of time on the new realities of this economy. And as you say, this is an outgrowth of what happened in 2008 and 2009 with the wealth gap and the fringes falling away, requiring people to work longer and still not feel secure.
Right. Well, I've also heard that there's many of us baby boomers who only have like $10,000 saved in their retirement. I mean, that's unbelievable.
It really is, and a lot of people are really going hand to mouth. So today we're going to be talking to Sarah Bruder, and we're going to be talking about this growing number of older people who, just to survive, John, have to become what I call nomads. Well, I call them that because the name of her book is Nomadland. Now, you might say, wait a minute, in America? I mean, the people that we're thinking of as older people in the RV are not the folks we're talking about.
I know this is This was a surprising story. This is a very surprising story because many of these people were very successful people, and they lost it.
Well, something happened along the way. It could have been the loss of a spouse. It could have been alcoholism. It could have been just a bad run in the stock market, whatever it might be.
Right.
And they give up on a conventional life, or they lose their homes in many cases, and they start to travel the country in RVs, camper vans, trailers, looking for not what you and I talked about in terms of adventure, but looking for work.
Looking for work, yeah. And they take some very hard work.
Well, a lot of it is seasonal, much low paying, often at Amazon facilities because there's some kind of tax benefit that they can take advantage of Amazon to hire these older workers. And these people, though, as much as you and I may wonder, like, how do you do that? They've built a new subculture out there, and they're surviving and in many ways building new communities that may be out there for us to see. If you look in a hotel parking lot or whatever, you may see this and not even understand what's going on.
Yeah, this is an incredible story. This
Absolutely.
Is really an
Well, let's
incredible
take a listen to it now. It's a bittersweet story about Nomadland here in our midst. Jessica Bruder is with us. The book is called Nomadland, Surviving America in the 21st Century. And for many people, Jessica, that might take on one interpretation or another. But here, just to be clear, you're talking about older Americans and a strategy that they have employed for surviving America. And you didn't do it sitting in your home comfortably behind your computer. You got involved through full immersion journalism. Explain how you do that and what story you were looking to tell and how you found that there was a story like this brewing in America.
Sure. Well, as a journalist, I do a lot of reading. So when I am at home sitting in my chair, I consume a lot of information. And I've been interested in work in Amazon warehouses and have been reading about how tough that work can be. And in one story, a couple lines jumped out at me in which RVers were saying, oh, yeah, we work here through a special program because we can't afford to retire. And I said, huh, that's interesting. And while the story moved on, I didn't. I got kind of hung up on it. I started looking around online and just learning how many jobs were available for people who were permanently on the road, and how many, like the Amazon one, seemed to be attracting people who are at or nearing traditional retirement age. It kind of blew my mind just to see this entire universe that I hadn't been aware of. So when I started out, I had to speak at a conference on the West Coast, and I said, hey, if I crash with friends, can I have a stipend? And then I rented a car after the conference, drove to Nevada, and started talking to work campers who were just outside an Amazon warehouse near Reno. I did the same thing in Kansas. I realized there was something really interesting going on because so many of these people had been pushed out of the traditional middle class by the Great Recession or by the fact that we are in an economy where wages have been flat for so long. I mean, our minimum wage, our federal minimum wage at $7.25 is almost laughable. And the prices of traditional housing has continued to climb. So these people had kind of discovered a hack. For most of us, our biggest expense is housing. Mm-hmm. They'd cut that out and taken to the road working. So at first I was in a tent.
Go on.
Oh, yeah. So at first I had a borrowed tent. That was when I was working on the magazine story. And then when I wanted to go a bit deeper and I signed up to do the book project, I bought a 95 GMC Vandora, which I lovingly named Halen. And Halen and I took off to see what more we could learn.
We'll return to this episode of America Trends in just a moment. If you like what we're doing here at America Trends Podcast, please don't keep it to yourself. I know there are a lot of people, John, who think, well, if I'm listening and somebody else wants to listen at the same time, maybe we're going to collide and they're not going to be able to hear us. Yeah. Is that the way the technology works?
No, there's plenty of bandwidth. Everybody can listen at the same time.
All right. Well, that dispels that myth. Now, you can do a number of things that would really be helpful to us. You could give us a kind rating or a review at Apple Podcasts, and that boosts what they consider to be our value and visibility. And what does that do, John?
Well, that puts us in the forefront so that you can find us easier, and most important is other people can find us easier.
And you can subscribe there or on our site, americatrendspodcast.com, or wherever you're listening, so we can alert you to new episodes of the podcast, which, by the way, we put out twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And stay in touch with us on both Facebook and Twitter at Trends Podcast. Or you can like us on Facebook or follow us where, John?
On Twitter.
On Twitter, that's right, where the world turns to hear fake news or whatever it is. Well,
Not
you can
us,
direct
though. We
message
have
us
real news.
at Trends Podcast or using hashtag Trends Podcast. And you know, John, with our growing audience, and really it's been pretty remarkable, a lot of people just came to us the last month or two, and they might have missed earlier episodes. Can they get them again?
They can look through them and pick the ones they want to listen to. They're all on the website, and a lot of them are up on iTunes, many of them.
All right. Well, listen, there's lots of material to listen to. We hope you have the time, and we'll lend it to us because we try to make it worth your while. And thanks so much for listening.
And tell your friends.
We now return to this episode of America Trends.
Well, when we look at this story, I've got to tell you, I've been telling people that we were getting ready to do this podcast. And, in fact, people who are involved in the aging community here in Connecticut. And they were stunned at this development. They didn't know that there was this subculture of nomads who are careening across the country looking for opportunities and really calling home one of these vans and naming these vans one thing or another. I mean, how surprised were you? I mean, were you shocked at this?
I wasn't shocked. I mean, in a weird way. So the economic factors are very dark, but the people are very creative and very resilient and very clever. So I don't think shocked was the right word, but my mind was fairly blown by the extent of this community. And also just the fact that I saw a lot of brave, fierce, resilient, creative, single older women on the road, which, again, makes sense when you think about the economics. Women still have lower lifetime earnings than men, which is on account of both the gender wage gap and the fact that women often take time out of the workforce for the unpaid labor of caregiving. So they have lower Social Security as a result. They live longer, and many women of the generation I was interviewing were not really prepared when they were young to enter the workforce. We used to be in a society where one income was enough to support a family, and usually the breadwinner was male. So I should have guessed that I would have seen women out there, but that really, seeing so many, surprised me.
Is this a phenomenon that is regional in any way, or is it truly national?
I've seen people all over the place, but a lot of people do gravitate towards areas that are most hospitable for this way of life. And while there is some pushback, there's definitely a crackdown on the community going on in a lot of municipalities. Many areas of the West offer a more temperate place to live. There's a lot of wide open space and public land. And in some of these public lands, one can stay for, if not for free, for very little money. So I've seen that drawing people to certain areas. People follow the weather, they follow the jobs, and sometimes they follow each other.
Did Jeff Bezos get some kind of special tax advantage by hiring seniors? I mean, how did this all come about, and how much of this is Amazon-centric?
Yeah, so Amazon says they're one of the biggest employers of work campers. They have been running this program since 2008, just bringing in workers for what they later named the camper force. So basically these workers are doing some pretty difficult pick and tack jobs. They are taking them, often these people were unemployed previously, before Amazon hired them. So I believe there are some tax advantages affiliated with that. And again, this is something that was really counterintuitive to me because a lot of these warehouses, the work there is pretty hard and it's suited to, you would think, younger bodies. But the turnover rate for a lot of these jobs is quite high. And according to recruiters for Camper Force, one of the things they quite like is the can-do attitude of these older workers. They show up, they don't complain, and they have fantastic attendance rates. And this is all well and good, but it also does make me concerned sometimes that they might be more exploitable than some of their peers.
Well, of course, you deem it real estate, and these are Okies of the Great Recession, grandparents living in school buses and vans, seeking seasonal work. I think most of us never really contemplate that for our mothers or grandmothers or ourselves. We can't even imagine this way of life.
Yeah, I tried to get my mom to come out with me in the van just to go to Phoenix, and that didn't even work.
No thanks.
So I'm with you there. Yeah, no thanks.
Well, when you look at it, I mean, some of the people that you ran into, and we will talk about them, I mean, they are fascinating, as you say, in and of themselves. But what about the Gulf veteran who told you, I survived the Army, I can survive Amazon? How hard is this?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on what job you're doing and what warehouse. But I know a gentleman in his 70s who recently on one of these jobs was walking 15 miles a day. And a lot of people do it, and they don't complain. So it's not like they're walking around, bemoaning their lot. They are sucking it up and doing it. But it's not easy work. I met another gentleman in his 70s who spent his life working as a mechanic in the copper mines. His knees were shot. And there he is in the quality control department of a warehouse in Texas doing, pulling things off shelves and counting them. But the shelves are tall and there's a lot of squatting and reaching. And I just thought, oh, my God, this man's knees. It's intense.
Well, for anybody who thinks that this is a way of life that they initially thought would be the one that they would pursue at this stage of life, let me just quote from you. I felt like I was wandering around post-recession refugee camps. At other moments, I felt like I was talking to prison inmates. It was tempting to cut through their pleasantries and ask, what are you in for? So it doesn't sound as if this is really what they bargained for at this stage.
Sure, and just to be clear, those camps we're talking about in context in the book are at the RV parks around Amazon. So that's folks doing that particular job, which is pretty taxing and monotonous as well. So just wanted to make that clear. But yeah, I don't think this is, initially when I conceived of RVers, perhaps I was a bit naive, but I thought every RVer I saw was probably some, just these carefree pensioners who were just tootling around the country
Right.
and enjoying nature.
That's the
and fish,
vision
and,
we have of them.
yeah. And by all means, those people are still there too. It's just a mix, and the demographics are changing.
Could we put a number? Can we quantify this phenomenon, this real estate phenomenon?
Based on the jobs and demand, in terms of people who are actually out there and working and not the happy-go-lucky lifestylers, the best I can tell you is tens of thousands, based on a few data points, including just what employers are talking about in terms of applications. But it's tough because, again, nobody's studying them in terms of demographics, and they all have to be legally domiciled somewhere. So it's not like you can just check off on your taxes, hey, I'm a nomad, or apply for a driver's license not having an actual physical address. These things are required.
So what do they say?
Yeah, so some of them use family members' addresses, although I know people who've been kind of stigmatized by their families a bit, and their families won't let them do it anymore. Other people use mail forwarding services. Other people do things like go to North Dakota, where if you get a motel receipt for one night, you can qualify as a resident. There's all sorts of different ways to kind of domicile yourself, as they say.
Now, you got into this through full immersion, and you yourself worked at a job that perhaps we wouldn't imagine for you. I mean, what were you trying to do? I know, of course, the great book Nickel and Dimed and this full immersion journalism has become quite a powerful force in our society for at least exposing things that we might not otherwise know about. Tell us what you learned about yourself from this experience.
Sure. Well, it's funny you mentioned Nickel and Dime because I am a Barbara Ehrenreich fan, and I was actually revisiting her book by listening to the audio at one point while I was driving the van, and there's this great passage where she talks about how she's going to draw the line at living in a vehicle. And at that point, I was laughing so hard I think I almost choked on my cold gas station coffee. I mean, it was really, that was kind of a trip. But, yeah, for me, immersion was less about having the experience as me, but wanting to be somebody who was better equipped to share other people's stories. I mean, I was never under any illusions about, I'm a reporter, I'm a glorified tourist, I'm there and I want to know how people feel, and if I can feel some degree of it, I can probably describe it better. So when I could, I followed people on their jobs. I followed Linda May, who's the book's main character, when she was working as a camp host. But for jobs where I couldn't follow people and wanted to learn more, when there were closed work sites, I tried to go check it out myself. And that's why I went undercover with Amazon's Camper Force program and also at the annual sugar beet harvest.
Well, let's talk about Linda May for a moment, and then we'll get back to some of your own exploits. She's 64 years old, at least as you ran into her, a former cocktail waitress, a trucker, insurance executive. Tell us about her and how emblematic her story is as it relates to the broader story of this subculture.
Yeah, she's amazing. I mean, while I encountered many people who'd been whacked by the recession, Linda was more caught in a vice that affects millions of Americans. I mean, even if millions of Americans aren't doing this, these social factors that are working on the people I wrote about are working on millions of people, which is why I think it's so important that we pay attention to them. So in Linda's case, she was really caught on the low-wage treadmill. She couldn't get enough hours where she was working. She was working a job that really undervalued her skills. She had been a general contractor and a Home Depot project manager. Suddenly, as she gets older, she can only get work as a Home Depot cashier, which is a real come down, and she can't even get the hours she needs. Meanwhile, she's paying $600 a month to live in what's essentially a stationary trailer. And having worked a lot of low-wage jobs, she hasn't been able to set really nearly anything aside. And she said, oh my God, I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life until I die. And that wasn't what she wanted. So she started researching alternatives, and that's how she ended up buying kind of tin can of a trailer or an RV and getting out on the road and starting to do these jobs. And I think she was incredibly brave. It's not like she really knew people who were doing it. She went online and started researching.
And let's tell people a little bit about her. I mean, she had this lemon-colored trailer. She called it the Squeeze In, and she'd say, yeah, there's room, squeeze in. And,
yeah, she downsized from her initial RV. She started with a gas-guzzling 29-footer, which was so hard to move around. It looked more comfortable, but in reality, I mean, it was a mess. Raccoons chewed through the fuel lines. If parking something like that is impossible, and again, the fuel economy is terrible. So she bought, again, you were talking about this tiny fiberglass trailer. It's 5'3" inside. She's 5'2". It's cream-colored, and it's shaped like one of those hamburger containers from the 80s before we knew styrofoam was really bad news. So it's that kind of clamshell shape. And, yeah, it's pretty much a human life support capsule.
But her way and her cheerfulness and her willingness to accept all of these conditions, she had these rose-colored frames for her glasses, and she was somebody who could take almost any adversity and try to turn it around.
Yeah, that's Linda. I mean, she is one tough cookie. I don't think she's funny, and she has a really dry, biting wit. And I don't see her as being one of these super bubbly, positive psychology people, but she just keeps trucking. You know, she just keeps on going and keeps on moving, and yeah, has completely impressed me all the way through to, I don't want to give away a spoiler for the end of the book, but let me just say that we underestimate Linda at our peril.
But you've met others, too. I mean, you meet a software executive who lost everything in the market, accomplished women who've already aged out of the job market, a whole range of folks. I mean, did you not find those who were resentful that they were in this place at this time?
You know, it takes a lot of energy to be pissed off. So I did meet people who said, you know, look, I couldn't believe this happened. You know, why aren't the Wall Street bankers in jail or whatever? But they're not dwelling on it because they've got stuff to do. And it was the sort of thing where I'd have to ask people about it. It wasn't those weren't the first words on their lips. I mean, people are really just out there making do, and that's kind of number one.
What is a day in the life?
Oh, well, a day in the life for a work camper?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're work camping at, let's say, a campground, so these are jobs that are often portrayed as very idyllic. If you see the recruiting brochures, they say things like, retirement has never been so much fun, I'm staying fit and healthy and making friends. But what happens is you get up in the morning, you do your rounds on the golf cart, and you clean all the toilets. I don't know if you've ever seen campground toilets, but lots of people like to go to campgrounds and get drunk. And it is not always a pretty sight. So basically, people are cleaning up the outhouses. They are picking up lots of what you call, or what a lot of their bosses call, micro litter. They are moving trip hazards. I've seen people who had to squeeze pine cones off of parking pads, which is kind of comedic. Shoveling in a dark comedy way. It's just, you know, it's nature. They're pine cones, why bother? In my humble and not necessarily litigious opinion. They'll be shoveling the ashes out of fire pits. And basically, the first round is like a morning round of maintenance out in the golf cart. Then they may go back to their RVs and trailers, do a bunch of paperwork, check in campers who start to arrive, do other rounds. Yeah, I mean, they're basically cleaning the toilets 3 times a day, cleaning out the fire pits, dealing with people who are rowdy, getting people situated. And the weird thing about this job is one is only able to file for a certain amount of hours per day, which sounds reasonable, but because you're on site the whole time, people will come and bang on your rig at all hours of the night trying to buy firewood, trying to check in, and all that work is off the clock, and I've always found that a bit funny. So these days can be quite long, depending on who's in the campground and what's going on.
Well, an average day for somebody like myself who is kind of retired but doing a whole range of things, I can go out on the trail and I can bike and I can go to a museum or I can watch a movie. I can do whatever I like. I mean, what are their lives like socially? How are they looking at themselves? How do they communicate with their children, their nieces, their nephews? I mean, how in touch are they with the life that they left behind for the one on the road?
Very in touch. I mean, social media is this incredible thing because not only does it allow nomads to communicate with each other, but it also allows them to stay in touch with family. When Linda first set out on the road, her daughter and son-in-law said, look, we're getting you a phone with plenty of data. And they don't have many resources themselves. Linda had been crashing on their couch. One of their children had been staying in the equivalent of of a walk-in closet that had been transformed into her bedroom. But people really do stay in touch, and it's remarkable to watch. There's a lot of mutual aid that happens over social media.
And what kind of money do they need on the road to survive? And are they thinking about the future if they're 55 or 65 or 70 and are going to live another 20 years? Are they imagining that this is the life that they're going to be living in the next 10 years? Or are they trying to plan even for their future so they're not a burden to either their family or society?
Well, a lot of people don't really have a very good end game. I mean, I think in some cases society has pretty much abandoned some of these people, and they're living the day-to-day as best they can, and that may not involve planning for the future. I mean, I've seen people die out there. I haven't been there when they passed away, but people I've interviewed have passed away on the road. And I know one other work camper who was near an RVer, and she and that guy had been having some great conversations one day, and 2 days later the screens were covered in blood. So it can be pretty tragic out there. And I don't think a lot of people have a great end strategy. They're coping, and that's why they're out there to begin with. So, I mean, frankly, they're doing the best they can, and I wouldn't necessarily expect them to have the end figured out as well.
The Rubber Tramp Rendezvous. Explain that to us.
Yeah, that's an annual gathering, and a lot of it is essentially skill sharing among van dwellers and RVers. There are seminars on everything from stealth camping to how to get cheap dental care in Algodones, Mexico. There are potluck dinners. It's really a pretty cool event, and it's a great place for people who are new on the road and in some cases pretty freaked out about it to find a sense of community.
Amazon, what are they in your story about this phenomenon?
Amazon has a program called Camper Force that hires work campers to come and work in its warehouses in the months leading up to Christmas each year. Amazon contracts with nearby RV ports and brings in these workers from all over the country.
But do they come out as villains, or do they come out as heroes? Are they exploiting? Are they helping people, knowing the condition they're in, knowing that they need this mobile workforce? Are they trying to help them build a community or build some level of security, or are they only interested in taking advantage of these older workers?
You know, I'm going to avoid the loaded language because I really think people should judge that for themselves, but I don't think Amazon is into getting what Amazon needs to get done. That's what Amazon is interested in.
Mobile apothecaries. Obviously, those of us who get a little bit on in age, we're often taking prescriptions. I mean, how easy is it for somebody to keep up with their own basic needs when they're on the road like this?
I'm sorry, by basic needs, you mean?
Well, you called some of the work campers' RVs looking like mobile apothecaries.
Yes, that was in reference to Amazon Camper Force because so many people got aches and pains from walking around the warehouse. Mm-hmm. The warehouses also offer free generic painkillers. Those are in wall-mounted dispensers called Lil Medic. But, yeah, you'll see people looking for the right insoles, soaking their feet in Epsom salts, all sorts of things to just stave off the aches and pains that come from spending many hours a day on one's feet walking on concrete.
Did you find that there were many relationships that were built that led to romantic entanglements, people who finally found a family on the road that perhaps they didn't have back where they came from? What did you find about the social interactions?
Yeah, a lot of people, I feel like, ended up with what the writer Amistad Moped refers to, a logical rather than biological family. I do know people who met folks who have become their significant others, although I won't try to fool you. This book is not a bodice ripper. It's not. I think we see a lot more platonic love than not.
And as you look back at this experience, are you keeping in touch with some of the people that you met on the road?
Every day. I mean, that's the weird thing about social media, too. They chime in and I hear from them, and yeah, I'm lucky for that. I mean, they've been super generous with their stories, and I'm really honored that they shared some of themselves, something of themselves with me. It's no small thing to share your story with somebody, and I think it's really cool that I get to keep following those stories.
Well, we recently did a podcast that we posted called The End of Loyalty, and talking about a 30-year period where benefits were better, people could build a middle-class life working in a factory, and that seemed to be an aberration in the American culture, because before that we know that working conditions were pretty horrific, and subsequently a lot of those benefits and those generous packages have been taken away. Put this story and this subculture in the context of where you see modern-day America and employer-employee relations. Where would you say this, shows us to be in terms of the decline of some of the more paternal instincts of employers in the past?
Yeah, this is one of the many indicators that we are going backwards in terms of what we won for labor in the last century. I mean, I think we've all witnessed the steady erosion and decline of the 40-hour week across so many fields, the 40-hour work week. Retirement is eroding. Basically, everybody's expected to be on all the time, and companies are getting bigger and bigger. Antitrust law is totally gone. So I think there's not that sense anymore of the company in loco parentis. The company is more like, hey, you're expendable. You're lucky to have a job. Do you want it? And, it's really disappointing to see that happen.
I was talking to someone about, again, us getting together and having this conversation, and they indicated that they know that there are these kinds of workers here in Connecticut. They may not be living in campers as much, because I don't think in some of our small Tony communities that would be looked upon with favor. But they are out there. They're living in motels on a nightly basis, and they may be stocking these roadside activities that we see in terms of the picking season. They may be working at one of these Halloween shops in the coming weeks that pop up and then, go back, or July 4th fireworks. I mean, how can we identify and even enter into a conversation if we meet someone? How will we know that they might be living this Nomadland life?
I mean, you won't. And the funny thing is, with many of the people who are living on the road, they're hiding in plain sight. When I came back to New York, it kind of blew my mind how there were just certain signs on vehicles that when you've been around people who are doing what they call stealth parking or urban camping enough, you can just kind of see it. Just seeing the bus with the curtain, and then I stand up to get a better view on the edge of something, and I can see that there's actually an array of solar panels on the top. But there's so many vans out there that even, people want to blend in. Often they kind of don't want you to notice, because if they are parked illegally, or if sleeping in a vehicle is illegal in your community, which is becoming more and more widespread and is kind of an indictment of our values socially, because it's telling people, well, this spot is good enough for your car, but not if you're in it. It values property over people. So a lot of these people really don't want to be noticed.
If we were to look at any public policy that you think should recognize the value of what these people are doing and their humanity, what should we be doing if, in fact, they are there, they're real, they're among us, they're our friends, our neighbors, our citizens? What should we be doing?
All sorts of things. I mean, one thing I'd really like to see is all of this stuff banning overnight parking, banning sleeping in cars. It's just incredibly inhumane. For most people, that's not the first choice of where and how to sleep. For the most part, they're not causing anybody any trouble. And I think it's elitist, and I think it's sad. So I'd like to see that trend reverse a bit. Unfortunately, it's on the upswing. So that's one big thing. I know we're always constantly worried about Social Security being imperiled. Obviously, I don't want to see it privatized. I don't want to see it raided. I'd like to see it continue and get support. I think the fiduciary rule, which Trump keeps pushing off, needs to happen. It's just insane to me that financial advisors can be giving advice that is not necessarily in their client's best interest. I mean, we've got a lot of pretty screwy laws, and definitely tweaking some of them would help some of the most vulnerable people in our population.
Well said. Jessica Bruder, thank you for being with us today on AmericaTrendsPodcast.com. The book, and I recommend it, of course, is Nomadland, Surviving America in the 21st Century. And it's not a story that I think a lot of people really have fastened on to. But after hearing this, I would hope that you would perhaps look around your community, and maybe there are people out there who are living this life, and maybe there are some changes that can be made to facilitate their betterment in the period ahead. Jessica, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of America Trends.